What if the greatest powers on earth divided Africa without its people knowing? What secrets lie behind borders drawn in darkness? The scars of slavery, the shadows of colonization, the fight for freedom that never truly ends. The story you're about to hear is darker than you think. This is the Scramble for Africa, revealing the shocking secrets of the 1884-1885 Berlin Conference. Long ago, European countries sought to control Africa without asking the people who lived there. In 1884 and 1885, leaders from Europe gathered in Berlin to decide how to share Africa's land and resources. This meeting is known as the Berlin Conference. They drew borders on maps, dividing the continent into pieces for each European country, without any regard for the African peoples who had lived there for centuries. This event marked the start of what is called the Scramble for Africa, a rush by European nations to claim as much land as possible. They sought Africa's wealth, gold, diamonds, rubber, and land, and fought among themselves to dominate it. Often, they forced African people into labor, causing suffering that would last for generations. But long before this, Africa's story was already marked by tragedy. Over 500 years, millions of Africans were forcibly taken from their homes and shipped across the Atlantic Ocean in a brutal trade called the transatlantic slave trade. Ships left Europe with goods like guns and clothes, trading them for enslaved Africans along Africa's coast. The journey across the Atlantic, known as the Middle Passage, was horrific. Conditions were so terrible that many Africans died before reaching the Americas. Once there, enslaved Africans labored on farms growing sugar, cotton, and tobacco. Their suffering fueled a cycle of greed and exploitation, enriching Europe while tearing families apart. This tragic trade remains one of the darkest chapters in history. Millions of lives lost, families broken, and communities forever changed. By the 1700s and 1800s, people around the world began to speak out against slavery. They believed that no one should be owned or treated unfairly because of their skin color. Countries like Britain and the United States started passing laws to end the transatlantic slave trade. One notable leader was William Wilberforce in Britain, who dedicated years to abolishing slavery. Thanks to his efforts, Britain passed the Abolition of the Slave Trade Act in 1807, making it illegal to buy or sell slaves. In the United States, figures like Frederick Douglass, himself a former slave, spoke passionately against slavery, helping millions see its injustice. Despite these laws, slavery persisted in many places, especially in Caribbean plantations and the southern United States. Enslaved people resisted through revolts, protests, and escapes. A major turning point was the Haitian Revolution of 1791, when enslaved Africans in Saint-Domingue fought fiercely and overthrew their oppressors, establishing Haiti, the first free black republic in the world. Throughout history, countless brave Africans and others resisted slavery, demonstrating their desire for freedom and dignity. After slavery was abolished, European countries shifted their focus to Africa. They wanted the land, minerals and resources, gold, diamonds, rubber, and ivory. Initially, Europeans traded and attempted to bring their religion and culture to Africa. But soon, they began fighting amongst themselves to control more territory, believing that holding Africa would bring wealth and power. In 1884-1885, European leaders held the Berlin Conference, secretly dividing Africa into colonies, without consulting the people who had lived there for centuries. Borders were drawn arbitrarily, splitting tribes and communities, often forcing enemies to live side by side or separating allies. These artificial borders caused conflicts that still affect Africa today. In 1884, the major European powers convened in Berlin, Germany, for what would become one of history's most infamous meetings, the Berlin Conference. Led by Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, representatives from Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, Portugal, and others carved up Africa, drawing borders on maps, ignoring the millions of Africans who had called these lands home for centuries. They decided who would control different regions, with little regard for the complex histories, cultures, and alliances that had existed long before their arrival. One of the most notorious figures was King Leopold II of Belgium. In 1885, he claimed control of the Congo Free State, an area about the size of Western Europe, under the guise of philanthropy. Leopold's forces brutalized the Congolese people, forcing villagers to harvest rubber under inhumane conditions. Millions suffered or died under his ruthless regime, or while he amassed immense wealth. These borders drawn with no regard for tribes or histories, forced different groups together or kept enemies apart, seeds of conflict that still grow today. Europe's exploitation of Africa's resources and people transformed the continent's landscape, creating a legacy of poverty, violence, and instability that persists even after independence. Despite European domination, Africans did not give up. They resisted through protest, revolt, and wars. After World War II, European powers grew weaker and many African nations began fighting for independence. Ghana became the first African country to gain independence in 1957, inspiring others to follow. Leaders like Kwame, Nkrumah, and Jomo Kenyatta dedicated their lives to freeing their nations. However, the borders drawn by Europeans often caused conflict among different groups, complicating nation building. The story of Africa's past is more than history. Today, many African countries are still grappling with the deep scars left by centuries of exploitation and colonization. But the question remains, is the control and influence of foreign powers over Africa truly over? Many argue that even without formal colonies, external economic and political influences continue to shape the continent's destiny in subtle yet powerful ways. During the colonial era, Europeans propagated the false narrative of civilizing Africa, watering down rich and diverse cultures, traditions, and systems of governance under the guise of bringing progress. Indigenous practices, languages, and beliefs were dismissed or suppressed, replaced by European customs and values that often eroded the identity of African peoples. This cultural upheaval was part of a broader strategy to control and exploit, ensuring that Africa's wealth and resources remained under external influence. While Africans worked tirelessly, laboring on plantations, in mines, and in industries, much of the wealth generated enriched colonial powers and their home countries. Africans paid a heavy price, first into hard labor, subjected to brutal systems of exploitation, and first to survive under harsh conditions. They were often paid little or nothing for their work, yet they were made to produce crops and minerals that didn't benefit their communities directly. Instead, these resources were exported, leaving local populations impoverished and dependent. This system of exploitation did not end with independence. Today, Africa remains entangled in a web of indirect control. Foreign corporations and governments continue to influence economic policies, shape resource management, and sway political decisions, often through corrupt political leaders who are mostly manipulated or compromised. These leaders, many of whom rose to power in post-colonial states, are frequently beholden to foreign interest, controlling the systems that determine how wealth is distributed and how resources are utilized. Africa is abundantly rich, holding vast reserves of gold, oil, diamonds, and other minerals. Yet, much of these riches leave the continent and reaching outside nations, while local communities see little benefit. If Africa could better manage and retain its wealth, if it could harness its resources for the benefit of its people, the possibilities for progress and prosperity are limitless. A truly independent Africa, free from external manipulation, could redefine its future, building sustainable economies, investing in education and healthcare, and restoring its cultural identity. However, the ongoing influence of foreign powers, facilitated through a compromised system often maintained by corrupt leaders, continues to hinder this potential. Africans are still working hard, producing, building, and innovating, yet many see little or nothing to show for their labor. They are forced to produce what they don't eat, eat what they don't produce, caught in a cycle of systematic dependency and exploitation that was seeded during the colonial era and persists through modern political and economic systems. This legacy of manipulation and control keeps Africa's true potential locked away, and the fight for genuine sovereignty remains urgent. The question is, how long will this cycle continue before Africa fully regains control over its destiny? This is the Scramble for Africa, revealing the shocking secret of the 1884-1885 Berlin Conference.